There's a moment most of us have lived through when something done with good intentions turned into the very thing that caused harm. A word said at the wrong time. A choice that felt right until it wasn't. This story began with a small bird doing exactly what small birds do, and it nearly cost the largest creature in the valley everything. I've been thinking about that a lot lately, about the difference between help and hurt, about how sometimes you can't tell one from the other until it's far too late. The flashlight beam caught the eye first, one eye the size of a man's fist, half open, throwing the light back, amber and dim from somewhere in the dark. Marcus Cole didn't move. He'd been crouched in the red dirt for nearly 2 hours, his knees aching, his field jacket already off his back and draped across the massive gray head beside him. The elephant wasn't moving either, just breathing slow, labored, each exhale a low rush of warm air across the ground. The radio crackled. A voice from headquarters said the vet team was still 90 minutes out. Marcus clicked it off. He pressed his palm flat against the elephant's flank, felt the heartbeat through 4 inches of gray skin and muscle and bone steady. But working hard, too hard. Something had gone wrong 3 days ago. He knew it. He'd known it before he admitted it to himself. If this story reached you tonight, maybe from a quiet room, a familiar chair, somewhere the house has finally settled down, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. As the old folks used to say, you never know who needed to hear the same thing you did. The tin mug had a dent on the left side where it had once rolled off the hood of a Land Cruiser and hit volcanic rock. Thomas had never flattened it out. He held it now with both hands, the metal still hot enough to redden his palms, and watched the morning come over the Addo plain the way it always did, not arriving so much as revealing itself. The red-brown earth brightening by degree until the acacia threw shadows long and precise as compass needles. 14 years in the Eastern Cape, and he still made his coffee before he touched anything else. Before the radio check, before the log, before he laced his boots all the way up. Eleanor used to say he was the only man she knew who treated coffee like a sacrament. He didn't think about that now. He drank. The bush hat hung on the peg by the door, same hat. Same salt-stained ring around the crown. Same small tear in the brim he'd never sewn. The station intern 2 seasons ago had offered him a new one from the supply room. He'd looked at the intern the way a man looks at someone who'd said something in the wrong language, and gone back to his log. The radio crackled. A vehicle check-in from the south gate. He noted the time, confirmed it, set the radio back down. 8 months ago. Amara Cole had arrived with a duffel bag, a wildlife biology degree from Georgia Tech, and opinions that came out of her fully formed before she'd looked at the ground beneath her feet. She drove too fast on the dirt tracks and made coffee so thin you could read a map through it. Yesterday she'd corrected his species notation in the evening log. Not wrong, technically, and he'd said nothing, which she'd somehow interpreted as approval. He didn't correct that impression. He finished the coffee, set the mug on the desk, looked at the morning report on the tablet sector assignments, water point levels, the elephant movement data from the overnight tracking collars. One signal had not moved. Northwest quadrant. Same coordinates at midnight. Same at 0400. Same now. He stood up, picked up his hat, put it on. An animal that had stopped moving through the night either found something worth staying for or couldn't leave. He was already reaching for his keys when he realized he hadn't told anyone where he was going. The tracks were 3 hours old at minimum. Thomas read them the way another man might read a newspaper, the depth of the rear prints. The slight drag on the right foreleg, The way the herd's collective weight had churned the red earth heading northeast, while one set of prints simply stopped, turned, and did not follow. He parked 50 meters out and cut the engine. The bull stood at the edge of the dry waterhole, facing east, his back to the acacia line. From this distance he looked like something geological, a formation of gray rock that had always been there and always would be, but the right foreleg. Thomas saw it immediately. The bull's weight was distributed wrong. The leg slightly forward, slightly unloaded, the way a man favors a bad knee without admitting it to anyone. Thomas got out of the Land Cruiser without closing the door. The latch sound carried in dry air. He moved downwind, 20 meters, 15. He stopped. The oxpecker was still there, small, rust-billed, absurd against the enormity of the bull's flank. It had been working the same site. Thomas could see the raw, wet evidence of it. The tissue weeping, the flies already thick in the morning heat. The bird pecked once. The bull's skin twitched. The bird pecked again. Thomas uncapped his water bottle, took a slow drink, recapped it. The oxpecker fluttered off the flank, circled, landed again 2 inches to the left of the wound site. He did not chase it. He stood and watched the flies and the bird and the bull and the cracked earth of the water hole. And the sound of it all was the sound of things proceeding according to their own logic, regardless of what he thought about it. His thumb found the radio on his belt. He unclipped it, held it, clipped it back. He stood there for another full minute. Then he unclipped the radio again. Station, this is Hale, Northwest Quadrant, Grid 774. His voice came out flat, the way it always did when he was thinking through 4 things at once. I've got a mature bull at the lower waterhole, right foreleg, significant abscess, secondary infection probable. He's off the herd. The radio hissed, then Amara's voice, slightly tight with the particular alertness of someone who'd been waiting for something to happen all morning. Copy that. What's your assessment? I'm still making it. Protocol says we. I know what it says. A pause. I'm 40 minutes out. He looked at the bull, at the leg, at the oxpecker, which had not moved. Take your time. She came in 28 minutes. He clocked it when he heard the engine, checked his watch, said nothing. She got out of her vehicle and walked up beside him and looked at the bull, and her hand went immediately to the field notebook in her vest pocket. That was the tell, not her face. Not what she said, just the reflex reach for documentation before she'd finished processing what she was seeing. She pulled the satellite tablet from her kit as well, opened the park's monitoring database, and began pulling Thomas's historical entries on the bull going back 6 months. Standard intake procedure. He watched her do it without comment. We need to call Caldwell, she said. We need to not stress a compromised animal into a cardiac event first. He's already compromised. More than he is right now is what I'm saying. She turned to look at him. He kept his eyes on the bull. Protocol exists because individual judgment has a track record, she said, not unkind, just precise. So does waiting one night to see how an animal is actually moving before we sedate him. He paused. You sedate a 47-year-old bull in the wrong stress window. The anesthesia can finish what the infection started. Amara's hand went to her hat brim, adjusted it again. The bull shifted his weight and the flies rose and resettled in the same moment, a dark shimmer against gray hide. Give him till morning, Thomas said. She opened her notebook and wrote something and closed it with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence she wasn't finished writing. He stayed after she left, built a small fire at safe distance, not for warmth but for the smoke. which kept the insect's eye without disturbing the bull. He didn't eat. He drank the rest of his water and refilled from his pack, and sat on the ground with his back straight, watching. Near midnight, the fire had burned to coals, and the Southern Cross was directly overhead, and Thomas set it quietly, to the dark and the flies and the sound of dry acacia ticking in the faint wind. "Don't you go anywhere." The bull shifted his weight. Once. In the morning, Thomas would note in his log that the swelling had doubled by first light, but right now, watching the bull breathe in the dark. He did not yet know that the oxpecker had returned sometime in the night. The ground did not forgive it 58. Thomas knew this the way he knew the weight of his bush hat and the resistance of the Land Cruiser's third gear, not as a thought but as a physical fact that lived in his body before he was fully awake. His lower back announced itself when he pushed off the ground, and he stood slowly. One hand braced on his knee, and did not make any sound about it. 60 is a country I didn't plan to visit. He'd said that to Eleanor once, on the porch in Knoxville on a July evening when the heat still had its hands on everything at 9 o'clock. She had laughed and said, "Then pack light." He checked his watch. He checked the bull. Marcus was still standing. That was the first thing. The second thing was the leg. The swelling had doubled overnight. He could see it in the changed angle. The way the right foreleg was held further forward. The compensating shift in the bull's haunches, 4 tons redistributing across 3 reliable legs. The flies were heavier too, a moving darkness around the wound site. Dense and purposeful, the smell reached him at 6 meters warm rot beneath the dry grass smell of the plain. Something biological and urgent underneath everything else. He poured cold coffee from his thermos, drank it without expression. Eleanor's old thermos had finally cracked at the seam 2 seasons ago. The new one kept things colder than he wanted. He hadn't gotten used to it. Amara's Land Cruiser came up the track at 7:14. He heard it before he saw the dust. She brought 2 foil-wrapped sandwiches and handed him one without making anything of it. They stood facing the bull and ate, 12 meters between them. The bread had gone slightly soft in the overnight heat, but the egg inside was still good, and he ate all of it and folded the foil into a tight square and put it in his jacket pocket. "You were right about not moving him last night," Amara said. She wasn't looking at him. He said nothing. Took the last bite. She kept her eyes on Marcus. "I heard about the bull in 2010. He finished chewing, crumpled the foil slowly between his fingers until it was a tight ball, then put it in his pocket beside the square. "You hear about the one in 2013? She turned to look at him. "No." "Good. That was the end of it." He capped the thermos and set it beside his camp stool. The flies filled the silence between them. She placed the call to Dr. Caldwell at 7:31, standing 3 meters off with the satellite phone, working through the intake questions in the correct order. Thomas stood nearby and looked at the bull and offered nothing. He listened to Amara's half of the conversation, the way he listened to radio traffic, cataloging without appearing to. She read from the monitoring database entries she'd pulled the previous afternoon, giving Renee the historical record going back 6 months. Thomas heard her read the entries without comment. Then she held the phone out toward him. He looked at it before he took it. Renee's voice came through clearly, which meant she was at the Port Elizabeth station and not in the field. "Is Hale there?" She'd apparently asked this before Amara handed it over. "It's me," he said. "Don't do what you did in 2018. He watched Marcus shift his weight. The right foreleg tested the ground and held. Different animal. Same instinct. A beat. I'm 4 hours out. Team of 3. she disconnected. He handed the phone back to Amara. She was watching him with a neutrality that cost her something. He could see it in the set of her jaw. He didn't explain 2018. The 4 hours had a particular texture. He walked the perimeter in a radius that kept him outside the bull's reactive distance, but gave him sightlines on the wound and the leg and the ground. The water hole a palm width of standing water left in the lowest point, reddish with sediment, ringed with the tide marks of its own retreat. He checked the acacia along the northern edge for predator presence. Found none. Noted the absence of smaller birds. Amara had the satellite tablet open on the hood of her land cruiser. At 10:40, she held it out toward him. He walked over, looked at the screen for 3 seconds. Infection progression data, antibiotic staging protocols, and handed it back. "Trust the vet," he said. "You're not even curious." "I'm curious about a lot of things I can't fix." She looked at him for a moment, then looked back at the tablet. He walked back to the water hole. At 11:22, he heard Renee's Land Rover before he saw it a different engine note than the park vehicles. Slightly higher, well-maintained. He checked his watch. He checked Marcus. Then he looked at the wound site directly. Something had shifted in the color at the wound's outer edge, a change toward yellow that hadn't been there an hour ago. He stood with that information for a moment. Then he noticed the bull's left ear. It had gone completely still in the last 10 minutes. Not tracking, not responding to the approaching engine sound the way it had been responding to everything all morning. He'd seen this once before, on a young bull in 2013, and he knew what the stillness meant, before his mind finished forming the thought. That wasn't the wound, that was the infection moving. Renee Caldwell's Land Rover came in hard and stopped clean, the red dust catching up to it a full second after the engine cut. She was out before the dust arrived. Thomas watched her from the water hole the way she moved, already reading the sight before her boots fully settled. Eyes going to Marcus first, then the ground, then the leg. Not to him, not yet. She was 51 and hadn't softened into it. Her gray-brown hair was pulled back with the kind of efficiency that had nothing to do with appearance. She wore the Port Elizabeth vest with the reflective strip on the left shoulder, faded enough that the strip had lost half its reflectivity, which told him she'd been doing this long enough not to care about that. James came out of the passenger side early 30s, clipboard already in hand, the clipboard being the first tell that he was competent. Petra came from the rear, checking the equipment cases in the way someone checks them when they've repacked them twice already and still don't fully trust the inventory. Amara was beside Thomas before Renee reached them. She'd moved without him noticing, which he noted. Renee stopped 4 meters out. She looked at Marcus. She did not look at Marcus the way most people looked at a large animal in distress. She looked at him the way Thomas looked at ground tracks, parsing sequence, assembling information into something actionable. Her eyes moved from the leg to the posture to the ear Thomas had flagged to the wound site and back to the posture. She stood with her hands at her sides and said nothing for a full 20 seconds. Thomas waited. "How long has he been compensating on the other 3? She said finally. "Since I arrived this morning. Probably overnight. You see him standing normally at any point in the last 12 hours? "No." Renee looked at Amara. "The intake documentation. Timestamps are clean. And you sent the full monitoring history?" "Yes," Amara said. "Full database export. 6 months of entries. Sent it through the satellite uplink when I confirmed your ETA this morning." Renee nodded once. "I reviewed it on the drive up." She did not look at Thomas when she said this. "How long has he been off the herd?" Herd tracks were northeast, 3 hours old when I arrived yesterday at 0700. James wrote something. Thomas saw it from the corner of his eye, and his jaw moved once. Renee turned to look at him fully for the first time. The thing between them did not have a name, because neither of them had given it one. But it occupied the space between their eye contact, the way a load-bearing wall occupied a room, invisible until you tried to move it. "Good documentation," she said. "Better than last time." He said nothing. "Walk me through the wound timeline." She was already moving toward Marcus, positioning herself at the correct angle downwind. Oblique approach. Non-confrontational sightline. Thomas walked her through it. 3 minutes, all clinical. She asked 4 questions, and he answered them in the order she asked them. When he finished, she was standing at her closest approach point, 9 meters from the bull, and she spent another 30 seconds looking at the wound site. The flies rose and resettled. Marcus's left ear tracked toward Renee, held for 2 seconds. Released. "The ear response is present," she said quietly. "It dropped out at 11:22. Thomas said, "It's been intermittent since. I've seen that pattern before. On a younger bull, it means the infection has moved past the local tissue. Consistent with what I'm seeing." She pulled her notes pad from her vest. "That's why I'm not asking whether to intervene. I'm asking how fast." She looked at him. She had not softened. "All right," she said. "Here's what we're doing." The procedure outline took 8 minutes. Renee delivered it, standing beside her Land Rover, with her arms crossed and her eyes moving between Amara and Thomas and James, who was writing everything, and Petra, who was laying out the equipment cases and opening them in sequence with a focused quiet that Thomas approved of without saying so. Sedation, approach vector, drainage protocol, irrigation, antibiotic packing, monitoring setup, recovery positioning, left side approach. Renee said, "We work with the wind. Come in from his non-dominant, right side." Thomas said. A very specific silence. "I've sedated 340 elephants," Renee said. Her voice had not changed in register. "I've sat with this one for 14 years. Amara started. "Could we maybe—" Both of them said no, in the same breath and with the same flatness. And Amara put her pen to her notebook and did not look up. Renee had her arms still crossed. "Standard protocol is left side approach. Non-dominant for stress response management in. Marcus has a behavioral pattern on his right side." Thomas turned and walked 8 meters toward the water hole without asking permission. He stopped and pointed at the ground. "Come here." Renee looked at him for 3 full seconds. Then she uncrossed her arms and walked over. He pointed at the worn path, a shallow groove in the red earth, faint but consistent, running from the eastern acacia line to the water hole along the bull's right side. Then he pointed at the ground compression differential. The left approach had a layer of wind-deposited sediment undisturbed across it. The right side showed continuous traffic going back months, possibly longer. The difference in surface texture was 8 centimeters of compressed, root-interrupted earth versus a clean sediment layer. "He comes and goes on his right side habitually," Thomas said. "That's his known safe approach vector. You sedate him with an approach on the left. You're adding an environmental unknown to an already compromised stress. The standard protocol exists because individual behavioral data has observer bias built into. Look at the ground." She looked at the ground. James was 3 steps behind them, writing something. Petra had stopped moving equipment. Renee stood with her eyes on the differential compression for a long moment. The wind moved through the acacia, and the flies over the wound site made a sound that was not quite a hum, and not quite a buzz, but something between the two that lived in the back of the throat if you listened too long. "Right side," she said. She turned and walked back to the Land Rover. "James, adjust the approach vector in the notes. Right oblique, 15 degrees. She did not say Thomas was right. He did not require her to. By mid-afternoon, the infection had named itself in the data. Amara had the satellite tablet tilted to reduce glare, and she read the progression numbers with the specific stillness of someone absorbing information they'd already half expected, but had been hoping the data would contradict. The tracking rate across adjacent soft tissue had accelerated in the 3 hours since Renee's arrival. The preliminary assessment was systemic sepsis risk within 18 to 24 hours, if intervention was delayed further. Thomas was sitting on his camp stool when she showed him. He'd been sitting for 20 minutes without moving, which was unusual enough that Petra had glanced at him twice from the equipment staging area. His eyes felt like someone had lined them with dry sand. 2 nights on the ground, and the third coming, and his lower back had stopped sending distinct signals and started sending one continuous low note that he'd learned to hear as background noise. She held the tablet at his eye level. He looked at it for the time it took to read. Then he looked back at Marcus. He took the photograph from his breast pocket. He did not look at it. He held it face down against his thigh. Amara saw it. She looked at the tablet instead. The afternoon light came low and flat across the plain, and turned the red earth a darker red, and the acacia threw long shadows toward the east. Petra set up the monitoring equipment in the positioning Renee had specified. James recorded ambient temperature, wind direction, and the bull's visible behavioral markers in 15-minute intervals with the methodical patience of someone who understood that the log existed for the next person who might need it, not for him. Renee sat on the hood of her Land Rover with a headlamp she wasn't using yet, and the case files on a waterproof pad on her knee. The pen moved, stopped, moved again. At some point, she said, to the fading light more than to anyone present. In 2018, you delayed too long. The animal coded on the table. Thomas was 6 meters away. His back was to her. I know. You know why I'm bringing it up. He turned the photograph over in his hand. Face up now, because you think I'm doing it again. Are you? The flies moved over the wound. Marcus's weight shifted and held. The right foreleg tested the ground and held. No, Thomas said. This time I called it early. The silence that followed had a different quality than the previous silences. Renee's pen moved once more across the page, then stopped. I know, she said. That's why I'm telling you. Neither of them said anything after that, and neither needed to. The technicians slept in the vehicle after 11. Thomas knew, because the vehicle went quiet, and the movement shadows behind the tinted glass stopped. Renee had her headlamp on, and her notes in her lap. But her pen was still. He was sitting with his back to the second fire, smaller than last night's, better positioned when Amara came and sat beside him. Not close, 2 arm lengths, but beside him, which she had not done before outside of logistics. The plane was fully dark and the Southern Cross had moved to its midnight position, and somewhere beyond the acacia, a nightjar made its mechanical churring sound at intervals, as regular as something that had been wound up. The photograph, she said. Just that. He looked at the fire. Eleanor, he said. He did not put it away. The nightjar churred, stopped, churred again. Amara said, I had a fellowship offer. DHC, research posting, NIH adjacent, wildlife disease vector work. She picked up a small stone from beside her boot and turned it in her fingers. My advisor called it a once-in-a-decade opportunity. My mother didn't speak to me for 3 weeks when I turned it down. Thomas held the photograph. You wanted to be where things were real, he said. She set the stone down. Something like that. That's not something you learned from a book. She looked at the fire. Was Eleanor the one who brought you here? The nightjar was silent for a full interval. When it started again, Thomas said, She was the reason I stayed. Amara turned the stone over with her boot toe without picking it up again. She would have liked this stubborn old animal, Thomas said. And for the first time in 2 days, the set of his shoulders changed, not a smile. Nothing as legible as that, but something in the architecture of his face that Amara catalogued and did not comment on. The fire settled, a coal shifted, and threw a brief orange pulse across the red earth. Then Marcus moved. Not the habitual weight shift, something lower and slower. A full repositioning of the haunches that brought his right side toward them by 3 degrees, and with it a sound Thomas had not heard from him in 2 days low. Resonant, subsonic almost. The kind of sound that an animal makes not as communication, but as the body's own accounting of itself. Thomas was on his feet before the sound finished. He stood with the photograph still in his hand and looked at Marcus and read the repositioning and the sound and the quality of the bull's breathing all at once. The way a man reads 3 lines of text simultaneously after 31 years of practice. The right foreleg was no longer testing the ground. It was resting on it, fully unloaded. The weight had shifted entirely to the left side, and the angle of the haunches had dropped 2 degrees from where they'd been an hour ago. And Thomas did not know if they had 6 hours or fewer. He had seen this posture on one other animal in 31 years, and that animal had not made it to morning. He had no clean way to know. But he knew it was not enough time. Renee made the call at 4:47 in the morning. Thomas heard it from the fire, her voice low and clipped. The satellite phone pressed against her ear, James already awake beside her with the clipboard. The headlamp threw a white circle on the equipment cases. Petra was on her knees rechecking the drug kit with both hands moving through the contents by touch, not looking. The way a person moves through something they've done enough times that the hands know the order without instruction. Thomas did not move from the fire. He let his coffee go cold. Amara had radioed park management from the station vehicle at 4:31:16 before Renee's call. Authorization came back in 9 minutes. A single confirmed transmission from the duty superintendent. Logged. Time-stamped. She showed Thomas the screen without comment. He read it and handed the tablet back. The pre-operation staging took 90 minutes. Renee directed it the way she directed everything, through specific instruction rather than demonstration, trusting her team's competency until they gave her reason not to. She did not give Thomas a formal role in the staging. He understood this was correct. He also understood that correct and easy occupied different zip codes. Amara came and stood beside him while the team worked. She had her notebook, but she wasn't writing. Perimeter watch, Renee said to Thomas, without looking up from the dosage calculation she was recording. 60 meters. Keep the northeast vector clear in case he moves on waking. Thomas picked up his hat from the camp stool, put it on. He walked to his position, 60 meters northwest, which put the operation site behind him, which was the point. Protocol required a ranger at perimeter distance to prevent outside animal incursion and to ensure the sedated bull had a clear recovery vector. Protocol did not require the ranger to watch the procedure. Protocol had been written by people who understood that an observer outside the operational radius affected the animal's stress response during induction. He faced the open plain. The acacia line to the northeast was gray-black in the pre-dawn. The sky above it had begun its first lightening, not color yet, just the sky becoming distinguishable from the land. The nightjar had stopped. In its place, the first Hadeda ibis somewhere to the south, its calls arriving once and not repeating. His eyes felt wrong, 2 nights on the ground with the third running into morning, and his eyes had developed a dry friction at the edges that no amount of blinking resolved. He was aware of this, the way he was aware of his lower back as a fact the body was reporting without requesting a response. Behind him, he heard Renee's voice running through the final check with James and Petra. The drug names, the dosages, the monitoring intervals, the reversal protocol if needed. Her voice was the same register as when she'd been talking about the approach vector, about the case files, about everything. It had one setting, which was the setting of someone who had decided that clarity was a form of care. Then the change in sound that told him the approach had begun. He heard the team's footsteps alter the particular quality of footsteps, belonging to people moving with deliberate slowness, each step placed rather than taken. He heard Renee's breathing at distance, controlled. He heard James's equipment make one small sound and then nothing. He fixed his eyes on the acacia. His right hand was at his side. It closed into a fist, opened, closed again. The bull's low rumble came first, not alarm. Something anterior to alarm. The sound of an animal registering approach and running its own calculation about it. Thomas knew that sound. He had heard it in a dozen variations over 14 years, and he knew where this one sat on the spectrum. It sat close to the line, but not across it. Then Renee's voice, barely above a whisper. "Good. Stay with us." Not to James or Petra. Thomas understood. He kept his eyes on the acacia. The light was coming now. The gray separating into gray-brown, and then into color at the edges. The red earth announcing itself first, the way it always did, before the sky had finished deciding what kind of day it was going to be. The sound changed. He felt it in the ground before he heard it fully, the subsonic register of 4 tons beginning to lower. A vibration that came up through the soles of his boots and into his ankles and his knees. It took a long time. These animals did not go down the way smaller animals went down. They negotiated with gravity in stages. When it finished, the ground had a different quality of stillness. He stood with his back to it, and his hand opening and closing at his side. Amara's radio clicked. Then her voice, low. Incision made. She says the abscess is deep, tracking 3 inches up. Thomas pressed his tongue to the back of his teeth. How deep? She's working. He waited. The acacia did not move. The light was fully coming now. The red earth burning up its color from the ground as if lit from below. A dung beetle crossed the open ground 6 meters to his left, moving with the absolute certainty of something that did not question its direction. The radio clicked. Amara. Thomas, she says it's worse than the surface showed. His jaw moved once. He said nothing. He thought about the morning Eleanor's doctor had come out of the cardiac unit, and Thomas had been the only one in the hallway, standing by the water fountain, because he hadn't trusted himself to sit down. And the doctor had been a young man too young. Thomas had thought irrelevantly, and the doctor had said the words that rearranged the world, and Thomas had turned and looked at the wall and had not been able to look back for a long moment, because looking back would confirm that the hallway was real, and the young doctor was real, and the words were real. He had turned away then, because watching felt like it would make it real. The acacia was fully gold now, in the early light. Something moved in it, a glossy starling, electric blue-green, landing and immediately leaving. A detail, that had nothing to do with anything and everything to do with the fact that the world was still running its own operations regardless. Then the radio went silent in a way that was different from the pauses before it. Not Amara thinking, not Amara waiting for an update. The silence of someone who has heard something they are deciding how to transmit. Thomas's hand moved to the radio before she spoke. He turned around, not all the way in, 60 meters back, outside the procedure zone, not interfering. He turned just enough to see Renee's back, her shoulders, the set of them the specific posture of a person working at the edge of their concentration with the full weight of their experience behind each movement. James beside her with the monitoring equipment, the numbers running on the portable screen, Petra with the irrigation supplies, positioned and ready. Her eyes on Renee's hands, Renee looked up, across 60 meters in the low morning light. She met his eyes. Her face did not change. She held the contact for 2 seconds, then gave him a single nod. The nod said, "I have this. Keep going." He turned back to the acacia, something in the center of his chest, which had been held at a particular tension since 4:47 that morning, did not release, but it adjusted. The way a rope adjusts when the anchor it's tied to proves itself solid. "Vitals," Amara said into the radio. Her voice had changed register, his heart rate. "I heard." Petra's monitoring alarm was a single tone, not repeated the equipment flagging a threshold rather than a crisis, which was a distinction Thomas held onto with both hands for 30 seconds that stretched into a different geometry than regular seconds occupied. Then Renee. "He's stabilizing. Continue." Amara's exhale was audible on the radio. Thomas did not move. 6 minutes passed. He counted them by the light moving on the acacia and by his own breathing, which he had brought down to the deliberate pace of a man sitting still on purpose, rather than a man standing at the edge of his own endurance. His eyes still burned at the corners. His lower back had moved from background noise into something with sharper edges. He registered both without addressing either. Renee's voice arrived from behind him, not through the radio. Direct. Conversational. As if she had simply decided the 60 meters was a formality that had served its purpose. "He's a fighter. This one?" "Thomas, I know." The response came out of him before he'd decided to say it, which meant it was the true answer rather than the considered one. The procedure ran another 40 minutes. He knew the stages by Renee's voice and by the equipment sounds and by the particular silences that existed between instructions. The silence of a person working carefully, being different in texture from the silence of a person waiting or a person uncertain. Renee's silence was the working kind throughout. He catalogued this without turning around. When it was finished, Renee said, "Clean closure, packing in, monitoring goes to 15-minute intervals." James, "Copy." Petra began moving equipment. The sounds of a procedure winding toward its end, the specific clinks and closures of a kit being returned to order. Thomas walked back. He covered the 60 meters at the same pace he'd used to walk out, which was the pace of a man who understood that arriving in a hurry at the end of something would not change what it had been. Marcus lay on his right side in the recovery position. The bandaged leg was clean and compressed. The monitoring leads were attached. Petra was recording the first post-operative numbers, reading them to James, who wrote them in sequence. The wound site was covered. The flies were gone. Thomas stood at the edge of the recovery zone and looked at Marcus. Each breath moved the bull's whole side with the uncomplicated regularity of a large engine at idle. Renee peeled her gloves and dropped them into the biohazard bag Petra held open. She looked at Thomas. "He came through clean," she said. Recovery should begin within the hour, full standing. 2 to 3 hours after that, though at his age, he'll be stiff for 2 days minimum. The leg held the closure. That's what matters today. She paused. The tracking had gone further than I'd have predicted from the surface presentation. Thomas looked at the bandaged leg. How much further? Renee looked at him with the particular steadiness of someone who has decided that honesty is not cruelty when it is delivered cleanly. Another 18 hours, and we'd have been discussing a different set of options. Nobody responded. But nobody disagreed either. Thomas pulled his camp stool to the edge of the recovery zone and sat down. He poured the cold coffee from his thermos, the last of it, thin and barely warm, and held the mug with both hands. The morning light was full now, and Marcus's gray hide had gone warm gold on the upper side where the pata reached it, and nothing about the next 2 hours was guaranteed, which was the same condition everything lived in from the beginning. He held the mug. He waited, and then Renee said, without looking up from her notes, "Thomas, the 6-week notation in your early monitoring log." He set the mug on the ground. James pulled the full case file during staging. It came through on the satellite uplink Amara sent. She turned a page. "You logged a visible gait irregularity. Right foreleg. 6 weeks ago." The camp stool creaked once under his weight. "You logged it," she said. "And then there's nothing. No escalation. No follow-up notation for 38 days. The monitoring equipment chimed its 15-minute interval. Petra read the number. James wrote it down. Thomas looked at Marcus breathing in the morning light and did not say a word. He stood up from the camp stool, not quickly, not with the motion of a man who had somewhere to go. He stood the way a building settles, each component finding its new position under changed load. The camp stool scraped the red earth once. He picked up the tin mug from the ground and held it. James had stopped writing. Petra had stopped moving. Renee was still looking at her notes, but her pen was not moving either, and the stillness of that pen said more than anything she might have added to what she'd already said. Amara was 6 meters to his left. He did not look at her. He walked. Not away, there was no away here. 60 kilometers from the nearest town, 1 road in and 1 road out. He walked to the acacia line at the northern edge of the water hole, 8 meters from the recovery zone, and stopped in the shade that the nearest tree was putting on the ground. The shade was narrow. It covered his shoulders and left his boots in the full sun, and the heat came up through the leather in a way he registered without moving. The monitoring equipment chimed. Petra read the number. James wrote it down. Renee came. She did not hurry. She stopped 2 meters from him in the insufficient shade, and she had her notes folder under her arm and her pen in her hand, and she was not performing any version of kindness, which was the one thing he could not have tolerated at that moment. "The notation is dated 43 days ago," she said. "Gait irregularity. Right foreleg. Non-acute. You logged it at 08:15 on a Tuesday. The next entry in Marcus's file is the intake documentation Amara filed 2 days ago." She paused. 38 days of nothing in between. The shade moved slightly as the acacia shifted in a feint. Hot wind. Sweat had worked its way down the back of his neck and into his collar. He had not changed his shirt in 3 days. He was aware of this now in a way he had not been before. "I saw it," Thomas said. "I know you saw it. You logged it. I saw it, and I made a call." His voice had the texture of a man speaking from behind something solid. Watch and wait. Non-acute presentation. He was still moving with the herd. Still eating, still declining. Renee said, "The tissue progression we found in there this morning was not 4 days old. It was not 2 weeks old. The deep tracking we found was consistent with a chronic, low-grade infection that had been developing for about 6 weeks. Thomas said, or longer. He looked at the acacia bark in front of him. The bark was gray-brown and rough-textured and deeply furrowed in the way of trees that had been standing in dry heat for decades, and it told him nothing useful, but it was what was in front of him. I logged it, and I decided not to escalate, he said. Not because I didn't know protocol, because I made a judgment call about the stress risk of early intervention on an animal that age with a non-acute presentation, and I was... He stopped. The monitoring equipment chimed. You were wrong, Renee said. Not harsh, just the word in its correct place. I was wrong. Behind them, James read the number to Petra, who confirmed it, and the specific sound of a procedure proceeding correctly continued in the same register it had been running in for 2 hours. Marcus's breathing was audible even from the acacia line, that deep, metronomic movement of something very large and very old, staying alive by the straightforward method of continuing to breathe. Amara had not followed them. Thomas could see her in his peripheral vision, still at the recovery zone edge, her back to him, her notebook in her hands, but closed now. In 2010, Thomas said, Renee waited. I made a call on a young bull. Escalated too fast. Intervention stress triggered a cardiac event during sedation. He looked at the bark. He didn't come off the table. He took his hands out of his pockets. The tin mug was still in his right hand. He had not noticed he was still carrying it. In 2018, I made the opposite call. Delayed, animal-coded at the table, because the infection had gone systemic, and I'd been watching and waiting for 4 days, thinking I was managing his stress level. He paused. And now this, Renee said. He bent down and set the tin mug in the dirt at the base of the acacia. Not placed, set down. The way a person sets something down when their hands need to be empty. The dent on the left side faced up. The red earth had a thin layer of fine dust on its surface, and the mug pressed into it and left a clean ring. He did not pick it up again. He stood back up slowly, one hand on his knee, and the full inventory of 3 nights without real sleep, and 2 days of dry heat, and the specific exhaustion that comes from sustained vigilance arrived in his body simultaneously. His lower back had moved past background noise. His eyes burned. The sweat at his collar had gone cold despite the heat. He was 58 years old, and he was standing under an acacia tree in the Eastern Cape with the full weight of 31 years arranged in a line that led directly to this morning. And the line did not flatter him. He had told himself the dent in the mug didn't matter. He understood now. Standing in the insufficient shade with his empty hands at his sides, that he had kept the dent for the same reason he kept the bush hat, and drove the same Tuesday route, and poured coffee before he laced his boots, because the accumulation of unchanged things was the closest approximation he had found to Eleanor still being in the world. He had stayed not because Marcus needed him to stay. He had stayed because Thomas Hale needed to be the man who stayed, who watched, who knew, who did not fail this one. This time. This animal, the way he had failed the young bull in 2010 and the older one in 2018, and the woman in the cardiac unit hallway whose name he kept in his breast pocket, because there was nowhere else to put it. 31 years. He'd said it without pride, a fact requiring acknowledgement, not celebration. 31 years, and he had let this animal reach the edge of dying because he had been so certain. And his certainty had come from grief dressed up as experience. And he had not known the difference until Renee read him a timestamp from a Tuesday morning 6 weeks ago, The flies had found the bandage site. Not many Petra moved to address them. She was efficient. Thomas watched her work and understood that she would be fine without him directing anything, which was a thought that had no floor under it. He walked back. He sat on the camp stool. He did not reach for the mug. He looked at Marcus breathing in the gold morning light and held his empty hands in his lap. Amara sat down 3 meters away. She opened her mouth. "Don't," he said. She closed it. The monitoring equipment chimed its interval. Thomas sat with the cold absence of the mug and the heat in his collar and the flies and the sound of Marcus breathing, and in his chest, in the specific place where certainty had lived for 31 years. There was now something that had no floor and no walls and no name he was willing to say aloud. Then Renee's voice, sharp and without preamble. "His temperature. James read me that number again." James read it. Renee did not respond immediately, which was the tell. When she spoke, she did not look at Marcus. She looked at Thomas. "It's climbing," she said. The number on the monitoring screen was 38.9. Renee was already moving. "James, secondary antibiotic. The ceftiophore, not the oxytetracycline. Petra, I need the temperature probe at the axillary site." James was at the drug kit before she finished the sentence. Petra had the probe in her hand. Thomas stood up from the camp stool. "Stay at the perimeter," Renee said, not looking at him. Her hands were already gloved. He stayed. He stood at the recovery zone edge with his empty hands at his sides and watched Renee work and felt the specific quality of uselessness that belongs to a person standing outside a room where something important is being decided. The tin mug was still in the dirt at the base of the acacia 8 meters behind him. He had not gone back for it. 38.9 was not a crisis. He knew this. A post-operative temperature elevation in a large mammal coming through a significant infection had a range of normal that included 38.9. He knew this the way he knew the weight of his hat and the resistance of the third gear. Not as a thought, but as a fact that lived in the body. What he also knew was that Marcus had been running a subclinical fever for 6 weeks, while Thomas had been watching and waiting and trusting 31 years of instinct. And that 38.9 post-operatively in an animal whose immune system had been managing a chronic infection for that long was not the same 38.9. It would have been in an animal presenting clean. Petra placed the probe, read the number. 39.1. "It's climbing," Amara said quietly, beside him. "I know." Renee administered the secondary antibiotic with the efficiency of someone who had already mapped this contingency before it arrived. The dose calculation took her 40 seconds. She did it in her head, confirmed it against her notes, drew the syringe, administered it through the IV line James had placed during surgery. Her hands did not hesitate. The monitoring chimed. "Petra, 39.2. Renee, we're ahead of it. This will take time. Keep the intervals." She said this with her back to Thomas, which meant she was saying it to James and Petra, which meant she was running her team and not managing his state, which was the correct thing to do, which he stood at the perimeter and understood with a clarity that had nothing comfortable in it. He took the photograph from his breast pocket. He held it face down against his thigh. He had taken it the afternoon of Eleanor's memorial service, not before, not after, the afternoon of, when everyone had gone home and the house was the specific kind of full that empty houses are when they have just had people in them. And he had found her reading glasses on the kitchen counter, folded, where she had left them that last morning. and he had sat down on the kitchen floor beside the counter and stayed there until the light changed. When he stood up, he had taken the photograph from the mantel and put it in his breast pocket, and had not taken it out in the house again. Eleanor's reading glasses were in the drawer of his bedside table at the station, still folded. The monitoring chimed. Petra. 39.1, a fraction, in the right direction. Renee did not comment. She was watching the portable screen with the focused attention of someone tracking a thing that has not yet decided which way it will go. 15 minutes. The probe read 39 even. Thomas turned the photograph over. He looked at it in the morning light, Eleanor in the field vest, the Kruger acacia behind her, the laugh that had nothing posed in it because she had not known he was about to take it. He had caught her in the middle of being herself. He had been catching her in the middle of being herself for 22 years before the cardiac unit hallway. And then, he had not been catching her in the middle of anything anymore. The monitoring chimed. Petra, 38. 38.8. There it is, Renee said. Hold the interval. We're not done yet. This will continue coming down over the next hour. Watch for any secondary spike above 39.5. Copy, James said. Thomas put the photograph back in his pocket. It's moving the right direction. Amara said. He said, I know. And something in the way he said it was different from the way he'd said it 30 minutes ago. And Amara heard the difference and did not comment on it. Which was the right call. Renee ran the next 50 minutes the same way she had run everything with the flat. Continuous competence of someone whose standards did not adjust based on audience. The temperature came down by degree, slower than the climb and more deliberate, the way trust is rebuilt compared to how it is lost. 38.6, 38.4. Each number arrived, and James wrote it, and Petra confirmed it, and the monitoring equipment chimed its indifferent interval, and the morning light moved across the plain, the way morning light moves when it has no opinion about outcomes. At 38.2, Renee removed her second pair of gloves and dropped them in the biohazard bag and straightened up. She looked at Thomas across the recovery zone. He's through the worst of it, she said. He nodded once. She walked to the equipment cases and began the process of beginning to close them, not finishing yet, but beginning the series of actions that indicated the acute phase had passed into something manageable. James followed her lead. Petra checked the monitoring leads, confirmed placement, set the interval to 20 minutes. Thomas walked back toward the acacia. He picked up the tin mug from the dirt. The red earth had left a clean ring where it had sat. He looked at the ring for a moment, then looked at the mug. The dent on the left side. 14 years. He turned it in his hands once, then walked back to the recovery zone and sat on the camp stool. He poured nothing into it. He just held it. Marcus's breathing ran its deep, metronomic rhythm, the right side still. The bandaged leg in the recovery position, motionless, the compression wrap clean in the morning light. Renee sat on the hood of her Land Rover and opened her notes folder. Her pen moved for a while, then it stopped. She did not look up. But something in the set of her shoulders changed the particular change that happens when a person has been deciding whether to say something and has finished deciding. Thomas watched Marcus breathe. He watched the light on the gold hide. He heard Petra reset the monitoring interval. He heard James cap his pen. He felt the decision forming in himself, the way you feel a change in air pressure before a storm arrives, not the storm, just the quality of the air before it. Something in his chest had been held at a specific angle for 31 years, braced against a wall that he had built out of competence and certainty and the accumulated weight of all the correct calls. And the wall had not collapsed, but it had shifted. And in the shifting, he could feel, for the first time, its actual dimensions. He had logged a gate irregularity on a Tuesday morning 6 weeks ago. He had made a call to watch and wait. He had made that call not because the data said to, but because making it meant he remained the one watching the one who was present, who was needed, who had not failed this time. And beneath that, further down, in the place where the true reasons lived, he had stayed beside this animal for 14 years, because staying beside something that could not leave was the only version of staying he had left. The monitoring chimed. Petra read the number. 38.1. James wrote it down. Thomas set the tin mug on the ground beside the camp stool. He looked at it, sitting in the red earth. Then he looked at Marcus. Then he opened his mouth. "The 6-week notation," he said. The words came out level, which cost him something. "I didn't escalate because I wanted to be the one who managed it." Renee's pen stopped moving. "Not because I thought the protocol was wrong, not because I had data that contradicted early intervention." He kept his eyes on Marcus. "Because I have been the person who escalated too fast and lost an animal, and the person who waited too long and lost an animal. And I thought if I just watched, personally, with my own eyes, I could be something other than both of those things." He paused. The dry air moved through the acacia once and settled. "I thought I could outwatch the medicine." The equipment cases closed one by one. Clean. Final sounds. "I was wrong," he said. "I'll put that in the report. All of it." Renee looked up from her notes. She looked at him the way a person looks at something that has taken longer to arrive than expected, but has arrived in its correct form. 2018 was bad luck, and one bad call, she said. 2010 was inexperience, and one bad call. She held his eyes. This was neither. I delayed reporting early signs. Yes, she did not soften it. And then you didn't delay again when it mattered. A beat. Both things are true. Both go in the report. She went back to her notes. Amara was already moving to the supply vehicle, lifting cases with the quiet efficiency of someone who has understood that the moment does not require witness. Thomas stood and went to help without being asked. She moved to give him room. They worked without speaking, and the silence between them was different from every silence that had come before it. Not the silence of two people managing a professional distance, but the silence of two people who have stood in the same weather long enough to stop narrating it. She handed him a case. He slid it in. "You want to know what I wrote in my notebook?" Amara said, not a question. "No. First afternoon, when we argued." "No." She handed him the next case. "I wrote, 'He's right and I hate that he's right.'" He slid the case in, turned back for the last one. "Should have put that in the formal report." A silence. Then Amara laughed short. Involuntary, the kind that arrives before permission is granted. He did not laugh, but his shoulders changed. They finished loading. She closed the rear panel. "You named him," she said quietly. He picked up the last case from the ground. "No, I didn't. Last night, when you thought I was asleep, you said, 'Don't you go anywhere, Marcus.'" He held the case, set it in the vehicle. His hands came off the handle. "Eleanor's father," he said. The words came out in the same register as everything else, flat, factual. But Amara received them without processing them at her own pace, without asking anything further. And in that receiving, she gave him something that nobody had given him in the 6 years since the cardiac unit hallway, the specific dignity of a truth being heard without being handled. The monitoring chimed. Petra read the number. James wrote it down and looked up. Not at the screen, at Renee. "Dr. Caldwell," James said, with the careful tone of someone delivering information they want to be wrong about. "Reversal indicators. I think he's coming up." Renee capped her pen and stood from the hood of the Land Rover in one motion. She looked at Marcus, then she looked at the team, and her voice went to its operational register, the one with no room in it for anything except the next necessary thing. "Everybody back 2 meters," she said. "And nobody speak." Marcus woke in stages. The trunk first, then the front legs finding purchase, then the long negotiation of a 47-year-old animal deciding it was going to stand. The first attempt stalled, the second held, the right foreleg touched the ground and bore weight. Nobody spoke. He stood with both ears tracking, his breathing shifting from the slow machinery of sedation into something shallower and alert. Then he began to walk. Northeast, 17 steps, he stopped. He did not turn around. Every line of him was oriented toward the acacia, and the territory beyond it, and the herd he had not seen in 3 days. The pause lasted 4 seconds. Then he walked on, and the acacia line received him, and the waterhole was just a waterhole again. Renee said, "That's the first time I've seen that." Thomas said, "I've seen it once before. Eleanor's dog, the morning after she died. He stopped at the door, didn't look back, just stopped." Nobody responded. Renee shook his hand. The real kind. 1 extra second. "Both of us file the report," Thomas said, "including the 6-week notation." She said, "I know." She turned to her team. He drove slowly back. Amara's dust trail was 4 minutes ahead, still visible over the track, the red-brown haze thinning at the edges in the morning heat. He kept the Land Cruiser at 40 and let the distance stay. The acacia threw long shadows west. He passed the termite mound. He passed the pan where the buffalo watered in the evenings. He passed the spot where he had cut the engine 3 days ago and seen Marcus from behind. The herd tracks heading northeast while one set simply stopped. He slowed almost to stopping, did not stop, drove on. The station came into view at 10:23. Amara's Land Cruiser was already there. Through the screen he could see her moving at the sink. He sat a moment before he opened the door. On the dashboard, the small compass, its needle holding north. On the rearview mirror, the wedding ring on its cord, turning once in the vent air, then settling. He went inside. She slid a mug across the counter without turning around. Strong coffee this time. He held it with both hands, the ceramic hot against his palms, and let it be hot. "You'll file the full report," she said. "Both of us will, including the 6-week notation I didn't escalate." She nodded once. "Just all right." They drank. The radio ran ordinary traffic, a check-in from the south gate. Water point levels, dry and clear. No change expected. He walked to the desk, opened the long-term monitoring log, scrolled to the bull's entry tag number, coordinates, behavioral markers going back 14 years. He typed the name in the notes field, Marcus, looked at it, did not delete it. He typed, bull responded well. Prognosis favorable. Continuing observation. Then one last line, not standard notation. He typed it anyway. Some things need more time than the protocol allows. Some things need exactly what the protocol provides. Knowing which is which, that's the whole job. He saved the file, outside. The afternoon light had gone copper and long across the open plain, in the northeast. somewhere past the acacia line. 47 years of stubbornness was walking home. There is something quiet that stays after a story like this one. Not loud, not urgent, just present. The way a room feels after someone you love has been in it and then left. You notice it in your chest, maybe, or in your hands. If you've been holding something while you listened. Many of us know what it is to carry something for a long time without telling anyone. To stay beside what we love past the hour when it was comfortable. To make a call, wrong or right, and live inside that call for years afterward. Some of us are still living inside one right now. That is not a flaw. That is what it looks like to have been present for your own life. The story is finished, but you don't have to be finished with it. You don't have to understand what it meant to you, or why a certain moment sat heavier than the others. It's allowed to stay unresolved. It's allowed to simply rest, the way an old animal rests after a long effort, not defeated. Just still. Thank you for staying with this story all the way to the end. Thank you for listening.